What's up, guys? Metapunk here. Today I'm going to talk about cryptocurrency regulations after the FTX crash and also different methods of storing cryptocurrency outside of the exchanges. All right, so let's get into it. So basically, this FTX situation, you can compare it to the Black Swan events like Celsius, Terra Luna, or even Mt. Gox, and how this all started. The founder of FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, he minted and created a lot of FTT tokens, and he had a lot of ownership over it through the FTX network, and then his other company, the Alameda Research Company. And once the FTX tokens really had some sort of value on the cryptocurrency market, he was able to borrow against those FTX tokens that intrinsically had no value. He could borrow assets like Bitcoin and Ethereum and then pretty much continue to rinse and repeat that cycle. So the CEO of Binance, CZ, he caught on to this and he sold all his FTT tokens before anyone else caught on to it. And then that pretty much caused the Black Swan event. And the people holding their assets on FTX had their assets frozen. And that caused a much bigger sell off once more people were catching on to what was happening. So I think having an event like this, especially being a huge exchange like FTX, which is arguably one of the top cryptocurrency exchanges at the time of this recording, it's definitely going to push for regulations in the cryptocurrency space. And there's not a lot of regulations going on, especially over here in America, but it's really getting to the point where we have no choice to enforce some sort of real regulations. The fact that there's no clear regulations in the cryptocurrency space over here in the US, it's going to drive a lot of corporations that are based over here to want to go to areas such as Dubai, Singapore, or even Europe, because Europe is trying to innovate and be ahead of this new digital economy. And this kind of goes into what happened with the SEC case for Library, because now the fact that the SEC won this case, I think that they're going to force a lot more regulations on different cryptocurrency companies. So we're either going to see a huge collapse in all these companies or a large exodus of companies that want to go to other areas. And this kind of goes into having real jurisdiction over the cryptocurrency regulation space. So you have the SEC and then you have the CFTC that are both trying to be the head regulators in the cryptocurrency space over here in the US. The main problem with the SEC's regulations, they initiate a lot of the regulations by enforcement. So these cryptocurrencies down here were labeled as securities just because there was insider trading going on in Coinbase. So instead of actually charging the issuer or the exchange itself, they just automatically attack these currencies. And I feel like the fact that any currency or token can be labeled as a security at any moment is really going to hinder the space for growth. So there can be legitimate companies that were tied to some kind of insider trading or some sort of mispractice in the space, and then they're automatically labeled. And I don't think that's fair at all. So meanwhile, that's happening. You have the CFTC that's actually taking time to visit these companies and having real conversations. So I really hope the SEC they change their way of enforcement through regulations, or you actually have the CFTC that is the more favorable option, having more clarity or more power over the SEC. So as there's more regulations created in the cryptocurrency space, you're going to see more KYC and AML services for a lot of these centralized exchanges or financial institutions that utilize crypto. So basically, KYC is know your customer. So it's like the customer profile is going to have a lot of their information, their birthday, their social, and all that stuff, just to have a trace of who is utilizing their service. And then you have AML, which is the anti-money laundering system. So if there's any suspicious activity or suspicious transactions, then it'll be tied all the way back to the issuer or the exchange. So when systems like this are really enforced through regulations, I think it's going to stop a lot of situations like the FTX situation or even Celsius, because these business owners really have to be mindful in how they conduct business, because it's all going to be tracked. So this goes into the next article where the CEO of Ripple, Brad Garlinghouse, he states that 99% of cryptocurrencies will probably go to zero. And I think that's kind of true because if most of these cryptocurrencies don't have any underlying real utility or they don't follow these KYC or AML services, I think that there's going to be a very large meltdown in the cryptocurrency space. Because if you have companies like FTX that were doing very suspicious stuff in the background, imagine all the other cryptocurrency projects that are doing the same thing. It's just it's not out in the open yet. So we're gonna see what else is gonna come out in the open in the future. Um, the thing with this, Ripple is having the SEC case, but in my opinion, I think that Ripple has so many partnerships and so much use already. I think that if there's no regulatory clarity for Ripple, I think that they're gonna continue to expand their network. So as this whole case is going on, and then there's a whole meltdown in the cryptocurrency space, you have countries such as France and Sweden that are utilizing their ODL service, and then they continue to expand their network of headquarters. So you have multiple locations of Ripple. You have some in San Francisco, New York, Washington, Brazil, Iceland, India, Singapore, Dubai, London, and then there's definitely many more. The main thing in this space, I feel like we still are in like the Wild West. You know, there's no regulations and there's so many projects being created out of thin air that have no real value. So I think at some point, having examples like the FTX situation is going to push for more and more regulations and then really wean out projects that have no value or don't follow these future regulations. So in my opinion, I think Ripple will be one of those big names that last in the cryptocurrency space. Okay, now I'm going to talk about self custody and actually taking your cryptocurrency out of the exchanges. So, some key differences of the wallets, you have the hot wallet and then you have the cold wallet. And a big thing to know about this, each wallet has a public key and then each wallet has a private key. So the public key is the public address that everyone can see, and then you pretty much use it to conduct the transaction. And then you have the private key, which is basically like the password of the wallet, which you do not want to share with anybody. You kind of keep it to yourself. Mainly, people just write it on a piece of paper and then store that password somewhere safely. And so here's the differences between hot wallets and cold wallets. So mainly, hot wallets are connected to the internet, and then you don't necessarily have ownership of your private key. And then you have the cold wallet, which are primarily offline, and then you own the full access to your key. So I feel like people that use hot wallets, they're mainly doing quick transactions. They know they're not going to store their cryptocurrencies. But cold wallets, you know you're going to buy the cryptocurrency and then store it here for a while. You have no reason to take it out and move it quickly. Okay, so here's an example of a hot wallet, which is Exodus. And I feel like hot wallets are mainly used for DeFi purposes. So they're really similar to decentralized exchanges. Um, they don't have the best security compared to a cold wallet, but they're really good for convenience, whether it's buying, swapping, or trading assets easily through here. So it's definitely a good alternative to the centralized exchanges, but it's not 100% the best because you fully don't own the keys and it's still always connected to the internet. And then here's a cold wallet called DCENT. And pretty much the main thing between this and something like Exodus, you have full control of your wallet. So when you activate it, you're given the private key. So normally you would write it down and then store that private key or password somewhere safe and do not share it with anybody. So no matter what, when this thing is offline, no one has access to it except you until you turn it back on. So essentially, this is a biometric wallet. So when you have it offline, it's a cold wallet. And then when you finally want to turn it back on, if you want to do any sort of transfer or any form of DeFi transaction, then it turns into a hot wallet. So it's a really interesting concept right here. And they have a decent amount of coins on here, such as XRP, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Binance, Stellar, Polygon, and a lot more. And that's the same with Exodus. Exodus is one of my favorite hot wallets because they have a very large selection of assets. So yeah, hot wallet mainly used for DeFi and quick transactions, and then the cold wallet like DCENT, which is mainly used for custody and security. Okay, so here's an example of what a transaction would look like if I were to send it from a centralized exchange. So right here, I'm on KuCoin, and for instance, if I want to send Stellar, um, I could just use the public key address from another wallet. So I would paste it here, and then it will show the whole address right here, and then what network I'm sending the transaction through. So I'm using Stellar, so I want to use the Stellar network, and then um, some transactions have some sort of memo as like additional verification. So my memo could be 8888 just to verify. And then I'll put whatever amount. So I want to send 1,000 stellar, for instance. And then I could just instantly send it from here. And the thing is, depending on what network and what cryptocurrency you use, so something like Stellar would be almost a feeless transaction and then a really quick settlement time. But if I change it to something like Ethereum, then I would change the network. I would change the network to ETH, and then you could see it would be a $6 transaction fee. And then let me do something like Bitcoin. Bitcoin network, $8 fee, and then I'll change it to something like XRP. And then that network would be 18 cents. So depending on what exchange you use, they kind of have like different fees and different transaction times. But when you actually take the cryptocurrency out of the exchange, so if my XRP was on Exodus and then I were to send it to DCENT, then I'll get the full effect of the XRP ledger. So that transaction would take 3 to 5 seconds and then it would be feeless. But if I were to use something like Bitcoin to send from Exodus to a DCENT wallet, for instance, um, that would have a much larger transaction fee and then it would take much longer because that's just the norm with the Bitcoin network, without any additional layers on top of it. So the fact that all these transactions are conducted on the blockchain, I can actually look up the address that I sent the seller to in the first example. So if I go on Stellar IO, I could just copy that address and then it shows all the transactions that have been conducted through this wallet. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying with FTX. So you have all these new regulation systems where I see the KYC and AML, and then also you have the public ledger where all the transactions are conducted. And honestly, that was like the main reason why FTX got caught because all the on-chain data that was going on between FTX. So having this and then the possible KYC AML, I think is going to change the way it brings transparency to the finance space. So I think meanwhile there's no clear regulations. I still think the safest thing you could do is have some sort of self custody in a cold wallet because meanwhile all these exchanges could potentially be insolvent at any moment at this point. So you want to take that out and have real insurance on your crypto before there's legitimate custodial services that will have real insurance policies on your crypto. But as of now, more than likely, the centralized exchange you use has no insurance anyway. So once that exchange goes insolvent, then your cryptocurrency is in their hands at that point. Okay, now I'm gonna kind of get more into privacy of like the different cryptocurrency networks. So in my opinion, I think Monero is the most private cryptocurrency out there. So right here it states that the majority of cryptos, including Bitcoin and Ethereum, have transparent blockchains. Transactions can be verified or traced by anyone in the world. This means that sending or receiving addresses of these transactions could be potentially linked to real-world identities. So honestly, having the public key and depending how much information you have on that ledger, it can also trace people's identities. So you have something like Monero that is completely confidential and untraceable. It does not have a public ledger, it's completely private. So I think this is a good alternative to having privacy. And I think as more regulations come, something like Monero is going to be valuable just from the privacy standpoint. I also like Monero because it's actually pretty efficient to use. There's barely any transaction fees, and then there's almost instant settlements. So from a privacy standpoint, it's a really good blockchain project to use. But even though it's very good for privacy, this kind of goes into something like the 51% attack. And an example of this would be if someone has 51% ownership of the Bitcoin network through owning most of the validators, then they have complete ownership over the network. And since Monero is proof of work, then that means it's still susceptible to that attack. And then now this kind of goes into something like Algorand that utilizes pure proof of stake consensus mechanism, and this is actually a Byzantine consensus algorithm. And that's really similar to the one that Hedera Hashgraph uses. So the thing with this one, whenever there's a new block that's created and that amount is proportionate to the amount that's staked, Those users of that staked amount are randomly selected to propose blocks and vote on different proposals. And this gives a chance for almost anyone to be part of the network. And I think from a system standpoint, I think that means that Algorand is technically more decentralized than Monero. But from overall privacy standpoint, I would say that Monero is definitely more decentralized. So it's pretty much knowing the pros and cons of each network and then kind of outweighing it and seeing which one is better for you. So the main thing, Monero doesn't have that public ledger, but Algorand does have the public ledger. But with Algorand, it doesn't have a chance of having that 51% attack because of that random validation process with pure proof of stake. All right, so that's the end of the video. Thank you so much if you made it this far. I really appreciate it. So yeah, in my opinion, I think that within the next few months, there's going to be a lot more cryptocurrency regulations due to the FTX situation. And if there's anything that I missed on the situation, or if you have any other cryptocurrency project or platform that you can see being and solving next, let me know down in the comment section below. I'm actually really curious to see what you guys have to say. So it's your boy Metapunk. Thank you for watching, and I'm signing out.